And today we're going to look at his nature, and I call it holy humanity. And for anybody who's streams it or watches this online, apologize. We've had some problems. Evidently our camera had a software update, and one of the issues is it times out and it just kind of stops on its own. So that's happened to us our last few Bible studies, and Matt also indicated it happened at a worship service a couple weeks ago. So we'll try to keep eye on it and make sure that doesn't happen, but apologize ahead of time if it does. All right, so let's get ready to look at our lessons. Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1 through 8, and then a quick look at Corinthians 14, and then our gospel, the story that we're focusing on for preaching, is from Luke chapter 5. But we'll start in the Old Testament again with Isaiah chapter 6. And we're going to read verses 1 through 8. Very familiar verses and story, I think. So we'll spend a little time with it as much as we need to. All right, Isaiah chapter 6. This is, last week we had the call of Jeremiah the prophet. This is the call of Isaiah the prophet. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. And above him were seraphs, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces. With 2 they covered their feet. With 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and the threshold shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried. I'm ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphs flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. And with it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. And then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here I am, send me. All right. So,
why don't we have that song this week?
Well, you could choose it for the end, at the ending, after Rain and Me. Or did you already choose?
I already chose, but I can unchoose.
You certainly can.
So would you read 4?
I'm sorry, but
Would you read 4 again?
would I read verse 4 again?
Verse 4 again, yeah.
Sure. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and the threshold shook, and the temple was filled with smoke.
Okay, and I said, woe is me.
That's verse 5.
5, yeah.
Woe to me, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips.
Ruined. Mine says lost.
Oh, lost, okay. Ruined.
Same thing.
Yeah.
But he's lost because he's not worthy, is that why?
Yeah. Well, what does he just gaze upon?
The Lord.
Yeah. In his full glory.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why I thought, why would you say,
Well, it's
I don't
me.
know. Yeah, well, why would you say I'm ruined at that point? I would think.
Well, because nobody sees the Lord.
Yeah, he because of his uncleanness, and God is totally other, right? He recognizes his fault. Peter's going to say the same. And this is a reaction when people come into the full glory of God, realizing your own sinfulness, and that you ought not be able to stand in his presence when he's showing his full glory.
Well, the light and the
The light, the image of the seraphs, the smoke, right? The whole yard. Isaiah is seeing in this vision, or in this reality. It could be a vision, it could be reality, but he is seeing it, right? Okay. Any other thoughts or questions or things that you want to point out or ask about before I just point a few things out too?
Go ahead. So how old is Isaiah, you think, at this time?
Don't know.
Oh, it doesn't say.
No. But we do know that it all happens in the year that King Uzziah died. And that we can tell you, that was 740 BC.
Now, is the seraphim an angel?
The seraphs are angels, some kind of angel beings.
Like,
And they're
yeah.
6-winged creatures.
came. They're like an angel.
Yep.
They have the same.
Isaiah prophesied about 740 to 700.
Okay.
40 years.
We don't know how old he was, but it starts in 740 BC. That's when King Uzziah dies. And King Uzziah had been king for a long time. His reign was a long, extended reign. It was a beautiful time, in the words of our current leader. It was a beautiful time in Israel. It was full of prosperity and peace.
I have to say it at least 6 more times.
Yeah, Israel was made great. But the reason that it was prosperous and peaceful is that the countries that usually gave them trouble had been weakened. And so the reason that they had it was because the other countries were weaker. They kind of had some internal problems of their own, the Assyrians mainly. And so they had kind of a peaceful, prosperous time. So when a king dies, especially a long-tenured king who was so effective and successful, what would be the worry? What would be the buzz?
Well, you wonder who's going to,
Well, they know who's going to take over.
will he do the same?
Yeah, will he be the same? So there's a leadership crisis. They know it'll be his son. This is a Davidic, right? This is from the kings of David, the line of David. So they know his son will be the next king, but will he be as effective? Will he be as good? And so everybody's kind of in a tither. Well, the vision, ironically, says that the king dies, everybody is all in a tither. Who's this next king going to be? How well will he be? And notice the very first description that Isaiah gives of how he sees the Lord. What does verse 1 say? Where is the Lord when he sees him?
Sitting upon a throne.
Sitting upon a throne. What do you think that's about? What's the message that God's trying to convey to Isaiah?
He's the ultimate leader.
He is the ultimate leader, exactly. He is the king. He's the king.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Yeah, don't worry about it. I still have the nations in this world under my control. I am the one seated on the throne. And his glory filling the temple. And the seraphims. So there are some kind of, those are, the word actually gets, kind of can mean like flying snakes, flaming, fiery snakes. Yeah, it's a different kind of word. But there are some kind of created angel beings. And what are they doing in this vision? They're flying, but what else are they doing? Verse 3.
They're covered. Oh, they're calling to one another.
They're calling to one another, singing to one another.
Oh, okay.
They're singing, holy, holy, holy is the Lord. Now, NIV has Almighty. I bet you the ESV has the Lord of Hosts, which is the better translation, right? We've talked about this before. It's the Lord of Sabaoth. He is the God of hosts. He is the Lord of hosts, of the angel armies, right? The angel armies. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of angel armies. And the whole earth is full of his glory. Now, where do we sing that song? The Sanctus in our communion liturgy, right? When we're about to hear the words of Jesus that says, this bread is his body, this wine is his blood. He is there, really present. And we're joining with angels and archangels in all the company of heaven who are singing this song. Antiphonally, they're singing it back and forth. We join that choir at that moment. Yeah, we join those angel beings and the company of heaven, our families, right? Our family people who are believers in Jesus, who are in his presence too. Not by faith anymore, because they don't need faith in heaven, do they? They see the Lord face to face. Yeah. And so they're singing face to face. We are singing by faith, but yet in the presence of that same King. Scandinavian Lutheran churches, some of them at least, more ancient ones, did a really good job of portraying that in their architecture of their altars. So with their altar, the communion rails would not be a straight line across. They would be a circle around it. half circle to the altar. So they were like kneeling in God's presence at the altar in the meal, singing holy, holy, holy. And on the other side of the altar, where there was an incomplete circle, is who? The company of heaven. They're with us in that moment, because whose presence are we in front of that altar? The presence of Jesus, right? And they are in the presence of Jesus. They by sight, we by faith.
Kind of interesting when they're flying, they have 6 wings, and 2 are covering their face and their feet. So it's like they're
And that word,
humidity or.
yeah, that word, well, they can't even gaze on the full presence of God, it seems like, with their face. And that feet, that's a euphemism for their privates. That's a Hebrew euphemism for these created beings having private parts that need to be covered as well, out of humility and modesty before the Creator God. So they're pretty powerful beings, and they're worshiping, though. That's their main point. They're worshiping. And then we get the reaction, verse 5. Woe is me. I like to say, a modern translation would be, I'm dead meat. All right, I'm dead meat. I'm ruined. I'm lost. Why? I'm unclean. Unclean lips among a people of unclean lips. That we are not clean. We are not holy, and God is. I have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Right? The King. There's that word again. The King. The one who's seated on the throne. King Uzziah, a ruler, not the king. The king is still the Lord. Yeah. And then one of the seraphs does the live coal from the altar. What's happening on the altar usually in the temple? The sacrificing of animals. Yeah. And so this is an image of God's forgiveness for Isaiah. He touches his mouth and says, your guilt is taken away, your sin atoned for. Through the sacrifice of whatever animal there was, God makes atonement for that. God takes guilt away from that. And now you're freed from your sin, so you can be in my presence. And then God's next question is, so who's going to go and speak for me? And Isaiah says he's ready. Here I am. Send me. So the prophet is now ready to do the work that God's called him to do, made clean by the sacrifice of atonement.
Isn't fire always something that is a symbol for clean and purifying?
It can be, but it can also be a symbol for judgment and destruction. But yeah, when it's in the altar and sacrifices, it's, yeah. But something got destroyed in that, didn't it? It's just part of the image of fire. Fires are purifying, especially when it's, usually the more common picture for that is in like a smelting process. When you want to purify metals, you got a bunch of rock that's got copper in it. How do you purify that? In an oven, with fire, with heat, yeah, and you melt it so that the copper floats to the top and the bad stuff
And that's
sinks
what
to
the
the bottom.
live coal.
No, that is not this one. No, this is just the altar is where the animals were burnt. Their sacrifices were burnt. Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Any other thoughts or questions that you might have from Isaiah chapter 6?
Well, he didn't seem to have any doubt that he was doing the right thing and saying the right thing. I mean,
Isaiah, his reaction.
Isaiah.
Yeah.
He was ready.
No, here I am, send me. But then we didn't read it, but verse 9 through 12 is God's response, basically saying, actually verse 9 and 10 is his response, and he's basically saying, oh, by the way, the people aren't going to listen to you. You're going to go, but they aren't going to listen to you. And those verses 9 through 10 are some of the most quoted verses in the New Testament. Paul quotes them, Jesus will quote them. They get quoted all over the New Testament. So if you ever do a thing with me where I say you can read sections of the New Testament, and I can probably tell you which book it's from, and probably tell you almost which chapter it's from. If you read those verses, you'll always stump me, because it could be in multiple places. Anybody else on Isaiah 6? So there'll be a strong connection to this story, to the gospel story, with Peter and the miraculous catch of fish. Peter has a reaction very similar to Isaiah's reaction when he's in the presence of Jesus. It's a fearful presence. When he finally sees Jesus for who he is, he gets a little terrified. But we're going to get to that in a few moments. All right, anybody else? Moving on. Let's go to Corinthians then. 1 Corinthians chapter 14. And 1 Corinthians chapter 14, that continued reading that we started a few weeks back in chapter 12. Chapter 12 started with all about the wanting to expand on this idea of spiritual gifts, about the diversity of the gifts, but the common source is always the Spirit and the Lord and God. And that the diversity of the gifts actually is a good thing, because God equips the church, which is his body, with everything it needs. Many parts, many members, but one body with Christ as the head. And so they're striving after what they thought were better gifts and more important gifts. And I've got, I can preach and I can speak in tongues, but you can't, because all you do is wait on tables, la-di-da-da-da. Paul says, chapter 13, which was last week, if you don't do any of that without love, you're nothing. Yeah, that's the greatest gift to seek, is the gift of love. And it's not a feeling, it's a doing, right? It's not a feeling, but it's a doing. All right, so we get to chapter 14, and I'm just going to read verse 1 and 2. And then we're going to skip down to our reading, which will begin in verse 12, okay? So this kind of sets the stage for it. Follow the way of love and eagerly desire spiritual gifts, especially the gift of prophecy. So again, the greatest gift to seek after is the gift of love, to do this serving thing, action for other people. But the best really gift then, out of all these gifts, is prophecy, which is speaking God's word. For anyone who speaks in a tongue does not speak to men, but to God. Indeed, no one understands him. He utters mysteries with his spirit. But everyone who prophesies speaks to men for their strengthening, encouragement, and comfort. So Paul is kind of saying, so all y'all who have been bragging about your gifts of speaking in tongues, it's for your own good. Great. But it doesn't build up anybody in the church. If you want to build other people up in the church, pray for the gift of prophecy, because speaking God's word is what encourages and comforts and strengthens other people. Okay. All right, so we're going to skip down now to verse 12, and we're going to start in the middle of the verse. But we're going to read the whole verse. On Sunday, I think we start in the middle. I don't know why. Maybe we'll change that after we read this. So it is with you. Oh, that's the verse that we'll skip that part. That's A. Yeah, we'll start with since. Since you are eager to have spiritual gifts, try to excel in gifts that build up the church. That's Paul's whole point here now. For this reason, anyone who speaks in a tongue should pray that he may interpret what he says. For if I pray in a tongue, my spirit prays, but my mind is unfruitful. What shall I do? I will pray with my spirit, but I'll also pray with my mind. I will sing with my spirit, but I'll also sing with my mind. If you are praising God with your spirit, how can one who finds himself among those who do not understand say amen to your thanksgiving, since he does not know what you are saying? You may be giving thanks well enough, but the other man is not edified. I thank God that I speak in tongues more than all of you, but in the church, that being most likely in worship, right? But in the church, I would rather speak 5 intelligible words to instruct others than 10,000 words in a tongue. Brothers, stop thinking like children. In regards to evil, be infants, but in your thinking, be adults.
So when they speak in tongues, are they actually knowing what they're saying, or are they just possessed?
They're filled. I would say filled, but possessed, okay.
It just takes over them,
Seems like it.
and they speak in tongues,
And they're praising
and
God.
they're praising God, so God hears and understands.
Mhm. And their spirit, but their mind doesn't.
But they don't really grasp what it is they're doing. And
That
so
appears to be
he's
the
saying,
same.
I want to understand
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
Right.
And
So for the sake of others, for their own personal faith, Paul says, go at it.
Mhm.
But it doesn't build up the church. It doesn't build up others. And what is God interested in? Not just you, but he wants you to be interested in everyone. Yeah, in the building up of the whole church. And so the whole idea is, if you do speak in tongues, pray that somebody's there to interpret it. That could be done. That's what Paul has indicated. That's a gift as well. You might speak in tongues, and I might be possessed with the ability to interpret that for the sake of others. And then that they might know what you've been giving thanks to God for, so that they can give a final amen with you, right? But if they can't, they're just kind of listening to you babble, 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 and go for it. We're happy for you, but has it done anything for us in building us up in our faith? No. Has it encouraged us? No. Has it strengthened us? No. Has it comforted us? No. So Paul says, I'd rather be able to speak 5 words that people understand to build them up than 1,000, 10,000s of words that they don't know, that won't build them up. Good. So the big concern here is always for the whole body, for the whole body of the church, not just the individual member. So they were very individualistic people, which we Americans are as well. Yes?
And the tongues is just a foreign language from a different country, or is it more of
A static, it could be both. Yeah. Don't know. Excuse me, in the first time in Acts, in the Pentecost experience, when they were speaking in different languages, it was languages of people, other languages of people. That the people who spoke that language could understand it, but the guys who were speaking it didn't really know how to speak it, or shouldn't have known how to speak it. But possessed by the Spirit, filled by the Spirit, they were able to speak it. Yeah. Now, are these speaking in tongues the same? I don't know. It's hard to say. I suspect that it's a little bit of both. If I could speak in the language, tongues of men and of angels. So the angel tongue could be different. It could be, a heavenly language that angels know, praising God. Yeah. It's hard to tell.
It says that God understands it.
He does, absolutely.
And then verse 18, Paul has that ability, that gift.
Paul has, he has spoken in tongues a lot. Yeah, I speak in tongues myself, Paul says. So it's not like he's saying you ought not to have the gift, but say again, now the problem was the people who had this gift or who were exercising it and utilizing it became for them a measurement of a better Christian. I'm a better Christian than you because I have this gift. And that's what Paul's got to deal with, is this pride and this arrogance and this lack of the care of other people around in their midst. So that's the bigger issue. So it's not that it's against the tongues, it's how they've been utilizing it and making it. And there's still Pentecostal charismatic churches today who practice speaking in tongues. For them, that's the measure of a full Christian. When you're baptized in the Spirit, not just with water, but in the Spirit, then you can speak in tongues. Then you've reached a level of maturity in your faith that others Christians haven't. So you kind of strive for it, and it's like, well, if you're striving for it, that's what you're doing, and it's not necessarily a gift anymore, is it?
Well, you're loathing it over
Yeah, and ruling it and lording it, and then it's, the gospel is never a measurement. Saving faith is saving faith. There's no strong Christians, better Christians. There's maturity and immaturity, but Paul would actually say that if you are striving after these gifts, bragging about these gifts, is that maturity? Well, he just got done saying, stop thinking like children. He would say that's immaturity. Yeah, that's immaturity.
Did you ever have, when you were in South Carolina, being a lot of Baptists?
I was never in South Carolina, but I was in North Carolina.
Did you ever shout out during the sermon?
No.
No.
Not in my congregation, no.
I thought maybe that's converted Baptists or something.
A lot of the Baptists there are pretty reserved, actually. That would, a Pentecostal would be, yeah, that would be a Pentecostal thing. The Baptists are not shouters. They're
I've seen
pretty
others on
reserved.
TV, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a Baptist.
The Pentecostals are more of that. Yeah. And they are a wackadoodle group, some of them.
Oh,
Wackadoodles, some of them are wackadoodles.
good word.
That's what kind of Paul is saying here, right? The Corinthians, right? You're kind of being wackadoodles right now about this.
I don't know if you remember, quite a few years ago when when they were still here, there was something going on at the fairgrounds,
I
at church.
remember that,
Do you remember that person
yes.
up in the balcony shouting out? He was speaking in tongues. Everybody, and people ran up there, and I don't know what the end was. What was said?
That was Pastor Adrian got us there.
Yeah,
I knew
that's
you were there,
yes,
but I don't
that's who was
remember
here.
anybody
I
shouting,
do.
you know, you do.
Yeah, and
You were sitting by me.
Oh, yeah, I don't remember it.
you don't remember that?
No, no.
Oh, that was.
Well, Pastor Adrian wanted us to shout
Wait.
during church service.
Oh yeah, oh I remember. Yeah,
They
hallelujah.
got mad at us.
Yeah. Because he wasn't really accepting of our German or Wisconsin, you know, it's just different,
Reservedness.
yeah. Yeah, that was not an accepting thing for him.
Well,
We're a pretty good singing church, though. We really are. My son has commented on it.
Oh,
a
really?
musician, yeah. He, in Oklahoma, the Lutherans there don't sing quite as well, he says.
Oh.
Yeah, than our,
Well, they don't sing, okay, zip.
we sing pretty well here.
Just
Hymns,
thinking
when we know
about
the
that.
hymns. When I don't pick a clunker hymn.
That's what I missed the
Some of the
most.
contemporary songs, they just don't know, I think, that's part of
Yeah,
it.
well, but they are led a little bit.
Yes.
So that helps.
It
You
does.
don't feel so by yourself.
Yeah.
In
Mhm.
congregation.
But Inez was, I don't know if you remember, Inez came from Iowa, she had this older couple always came with her, or brought her. That's when I first started here, I don't know, Tori, if you remember that. I don't know their name,
Older couple.
they weren't members here though.
That might have
Anyway,
been
he
your son.
always said that he had that experience, he mentioned it numerous times, that speaking in tongues, I don't know.
I would imagine, I don't know for sure, but I think I remember Fred Robart talking a little bit about that he had that experience.
Mhm.
I never have.
No one ever did.
I never have, no.
Oh.
Nor have I ever been in the presence. And there was a movement in the Lutheran Church back in the 70s and 80s called the Charismatic Renewal Movement. And that was something that was happening, and that became a big debate. What's your reaction to that? And it's like, I don't know. It's kind of phased out. A part of it was a reaction to kind of too much of a stoic presence and an orthodoxy, a thought that orthodoxy meant that you had to be stoic. I think it more has to do with ethnicity than anything else. Yeah.
Well, I mentioned about seeing it, it was usually after American
Heritage.
congregation.
I'm sorry, what?
When I mentioned about shouting out during the sermon, usually when I seen it on a movie or something, it was African American.
Oh, sure. And that could be Baptist, yeah.
Or Southern
Yeah.
Baptist.
It's hard. Well, no, the blacks aren't Southern Baptists.
Oh,
That's a very white church.
I thought there were two types.
There's many types. So African Americans, a lot of their churches are African American Methodist churches, or not so much Baptists. Yeah, Baptists are pretty reserved, at least in the South. They were pretty reserved. King James. I ran into a few of them that only use King James, only use King James version. That is a while for them. I had a funeral back in Shawano. She was affiliated with St. James, and she kind of had been shut in, but she had a brother-in-law who was a Baptist preacher from Green Bay, was the executor, and he asked that I only use King James at the funeral. I said, oh, okay. I did in the readings, but then when I preached, I didn't. Because I couldn't, who can speak in that language? I can't. So I quoted scriptures in the sermon. I just did it.
Doing it all the time.
Yeah.
To stay in that realm.
And they were fine with that. He was fine with it.
So, with that being said, when Lillian's funeral was, Hildebrand, and was, what is it, 121, the song, I Lift My Eyes to the Hills, was it ever mountains, or did you just decide to use that word?
I think ESV uses
Mountains?
Yeah. It is hills in NIV.
Yeah.
But I think the ESV uses mountains. I can't say that 100% sure, but I think it does.
Well, I mean, it was appropriate.
Interesting.
I liked
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else on 1 Corinthians 14?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the person speaking in tongues,
Mm-hmm.
does he know what he's saying?
It's hard to know.
So we could all speak in tongues if we didn't know what we were saying.
Yeah, okay.
That's part of it. Yeah, it's hard to know. It doesn't say, but the people around them don't, right?
Yeah, well, hopefully.
Yeah.
Someone is there.
I always got the impression they were in like induced trance, but Spirit is speaking through them.
That's the impression that I've gotten too, is that they're filled with the Spirit, and they're in an ecstatic moment.
Yeah.
So whether they understand it or not, I truthfully don't know. But Paul would advocate, if it's going to happen in a corporate setting, that the only way that it should happen is if there's somebody who can interpret that. Right. So somebody should be able to understand it and then interpret it for the rest. And so if you've been in worship ever in a setting where it's not your native language, it's really kind of hard, you know. I don't know when you were growing up if they still had German services at some places. Did you have to sit through those
Well,
and not really know German?
I wasn't growing
Now
up.
by
I grew up
Mayville,
and
we have really, smaller churches, they hung to that German law.
Oh yeah, and
Well, they had a special service for the Germans.
My brother did preach the German
he could
service.
still
Did
do
he
German stuff.
really?
Yeah,
8:00 service in Chicago.
Yeah.
pretty remarkable they could do that. Yeah. And did you ever sit through one?
No.
Yeah. So
I would like to have, but
they were all English speaking by the time you were, because you've been around a while.
I have been.
Out in
Out
Reedfield,
by Zion.
they were still doing.
Reedfield, it's Caledonia.
Oh, it's Caledonia. It's my bad. Were they doing German services at all when you were a little girl?
I
Was
don't
it all
hardly think so.
World War One, during World War
Oh,
One,
yeah.
it began to, and then by World War Two, that really became. There was at one time a lawsuit that some church in Nebraska was being told they couldn't do German anymore during World War Two.
No, because of the Nazi thing.
Right, they were all German, right? And so they went to court for that to be able to preserve their right to use German.
My parents went to German school. The catechism was all in German.
Sure. Elizabeth's grandpa, when he went to seminary, was still all in German.
Oh,
So that was in the 1920s, 30s. So yeah. But
Interesting.
I have sat through. I've sat through services where I didn't understand anything because it was all in Aramaic, which is
Can you
Ethiopian.
imagine being confirmed and not understand what he was telling, what the pastor was telling
No.
you?
Who was
And
that?
Nobody. My mother-in-law.
Oh,
She was one of 15 kids.
yeah.
And her dad wanted one sermon. He had donated the land for the church and the cemetery. And he asked the pastor if he could speak an English service,
Mhm.
and he refused. Because he didn't know what he was saying,
Oh, boy.
you know?
Yeah,
And she didn't understand her catechism.
sure.
It
That's
was
hard.
in German.
Wow.
She went through it, but
But she
never
went through it,
really-
but she never got. And
Put
I
her
found
time
that
in.
out when I said, well, we were talking about, and I said, well, you understand that you're baptized and you're saved. You understand that you're going to heaven if you
Yeah.
continue on. You understand that. She said, well, not really, not everybody is. And, I felt so bad.
Yeah.
That was Al's
It's
mom.
Al's mom, okay.
And I said, well, just so you know, I'm going to heaven. And I said, Al's going to heaven. Because we believe that was promised to us.
Right.
I felt really bad.
My dad, when he was working for Nakusa Papers engineer, he got sent to Finland for a week to learn some boiler stuff that they had there, and it was over Holy Week, and so he was there on Good Friday. So he went to the Castle Church for Good Friday service, and he says, I didn't understand any of it, but he said he had a printed bulletin, and he goes, but I knew where they were, because he could just figure out, and
Yeah.
from the liturgy, the structure of the
Oh, yeah.
liturgy, that when they were doing the creed, or when they were doing the Lord's Prayer, or when the gospel was being read, because he could, figure out just enough of it from the structure of the liturgy of what was, what was happening, or what part of the service they were in. But, intelligently
Yeah.
couldn't understand
Lost.
any of
Yeah.
the actual words, right?
Yeah.
In Sam's service this weekend, they sang a song that had a lot of Spanish in it.
Oh.
And they had it up on the screen with the translation under it, so you at least knew. So they wanted you to try to pronounce it as Spanish, and then you saw the translation under it. I said to Terry afterwards, that was very confusing to do that. I thought afterwards, I wish I would have just sung the English translation to the music or something, because it was difficult.
So you've been in towns ever that have a church called First Lutheran? First Lutheran or First English?
Mhm.
I belong to that, and it's over by, in Appleton.
There's a First
Downtown.
English there, yeah.
Yeah.
Wisconsin
I remember.
Rapids, we had a First English Lutheran church.
Yeah.
That was because
Oh.
they were the first to use English in the town.
Our daughter was baptized there when we were living at first, got married. And my grandparents and grandparents were there when we went, and then they had two pastors, and had the older pastor, the senior pastor, saw my grandfather and started talking to him in German. And my grandfather, he just smiled. He understood it. We didn't
You liked
understand.
hearing it.
Yeah.
Neat. Yeah, but whenever you see a church First English, that's because it was the first congregation in that community that used English as a Lutheran church. And it was generally German
Yeah.
based because they were. In fact, there's an entire district in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod that is called the English District. Here's what happened. So back in the early 1900s, late 800s, these congregations wanted to start using English. Missouri Synod said no. So the congregations broke off and they made their own synod called the English Synod. Well, when finally the stubborn Germans who were part of the Missouri Synod started to allow it, then they welcomed them back into the synod and they became their own non-geographical district. And there's another non-geographical district in the Missouri Synod, which is the old Slovak Lutheran Church. And so they also have their own non-geographical district. So they're scattered all over the country. I think like Hales Corners Lutheran, which is a big mega Lutheran church down in Milwaukee now, they're in the English district. And there's a few others. A lot of them are kind of historic churches because they were the only English-speaking one. But they kept their identity in their district for whatever reason. And the Slovaks as well.
I think the Slovaks, the heritage would be mainly Catholic, but it's.
No, there was a strong Slovakian, yeah. So in Bohemians, what happened is they became part of the Reformation, the Slovaks and the Bohemians, right away. They were in Luther's day. They began wanting to be, understanding the gospel as Luther was teaching it. Well, the Roman Catholic Church did a counter-Reformation, and they formed an order called the Jesuits, who became the missionaries, and that generally meant they would go and try to conquer the prince. And if you conquered the prince of a territory, then if he converted back to Catholicism, Roman Catholic, then all the churches did too. And so they did that, and they won over the Bohemians, and so the Bohemians became Roman Catholics again because the prince changed. So that means everybody in his area changes. So that's part of the Reformation history. But that's for another time. Yes, John?
That First English Lutheran there by the Concordia College in Appleton, was the American Senate. There's Lutheran Church of America.
Yeah.
And American Lutheran Church, which is now the ELC.
Right, they all merged together.
My wife made it. We were looking for Missouri Senate. She made a mistake and I got there. But they were so friendly. They even came out on Sunday night to see us.
Oh, wow.
And
There you
so
go.
we just stayed there for a while. We were there for 5 years.
Yeah, it was part of the American Lutheran Church, yeah. Which had a more German Midwestern orientation than the Lutheran Church of America, which is more East Coast and more of the Scandinavian melting
But
pots.
the service was all the same, just like I grew up with.
Yeah.
As far as that goes.
Page 5 and 15.
All right, moving on. Let's get to the gospel. Luke chapter 5. This is the one we're preaching on. Again, a pretty familiar story, I think. We're still recording. That's a good thing. We're still streaming live. Luke chapter 5. Verses 1 through 11. So this is pretty much the next story as we've been following Jesus in the season of Epiphany. It starts with his baptism. We had that a few weeks ago. Then we skip the temptation in the wilderness. That's actually more of a Lenten story. But then we had Jesus in his hometown of Nazareth. And there Jesus preaches and identifies himself as the Messiah. They want to kill him. He moves on to Capernaum, where he is teaching with authority last week. And he drives the demons out with authority last week. He heals people of their diseases. And then when the people want him to stay and kind of set up shop in Capernaum, Jesus says, no, I got to go on to other villages. That's why I've been sent. I've got to preach the kingdom of God to other places. And so Jesus kept on going throughout the synagogues of Judea preaching. Well, he comes back to Capernaum in chapter 5. And this is one day Jesus is in the village of Capernaum. One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, with the people crowding around him listening to the word of God, he saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and he asked him to put out a little from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "I'll put out to the deep water, let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night long and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." And when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and they filled both boats so full they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." For he and all of his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will catch men." And so they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed Jesus. All right. What you all got? Any thoughts? Any questions?
So right off, Simon knew there was something special.
Yeah, doesn't appear so.
Because isn't that, I mean, because he addresses and says master, we've worked hard all night, even, I mean, for him to say master, would that have been normal?
Yeah, that you would have expected maybe rabbi, but it does say master. So
But I mean,
there's some sort of respect for Jesus there.
Yes, that's what I was thinking, there's still some sort of respect.
He doesn't
so
use
it's not just some guy coming up to him and saying, "Hey, I wanna use your boat, take me out."
Yeah. Well, they've already met. We know that they met in chapter 4. When Jesus leaves the synagogue of Capernaum, he goes to the house of Simon. He goes to Simon's house because Simon's mother-in-law has the fever that Jesus drives the
so
fever.
this is already
That's
happened.
it.
That's already happened. That was in chapter
Okay.
4. So they've encountered one another in this village.
Okay.
Yeah. And so Simon already knows a bit about Jesus. Yeah, he's heard his teaching most likely, and been amazed by it. He sees Jesus
But
drive.
he's still fishing at this time.
Yeah, he's still a fisherman at this time. Yeah, but his call comes here.
Is Nathaniel Simon's brother?
No, Andrew is his brother.
Oh, Andrew, and and one of them was a follower of John.
Andrew was Andrew was a follower of John, or one of John's people. Yeah, and it's Andrew who brings Jesus the first time to Simon, and they meet. Yeah, that's in John 1. But it goes from master, interesting, right? From verse 5, master. And it's almost like Jesus says, "Yeah, let's go out fishing." And how would you describe Peter's reaction to that in verse 5?
Okay.
Yeah, right. We've worked all
Really?
night.
Yeah.
You're a carpenter, a teacher. I'm the fisherman. People fish at night, not the day. But if you say so, we'll do it. Yeah, it's a reluctancy, right? Yeah, and I think probably really, but they do so, and the fish come, right? And it's that moment then that it goes from master to how does he address Jesus?
Well, he fell at his feet.
Lord, yeah, falls at his feet, at Jesus' knees, and says, "Lord, go away from me, Lord. Right, I'm a sinful man." Sounds like Isaiah. Woe is me, I am lost. I'm a man of unclean lips among a people of unclean lips. And I've seen the Lord. I've seen the presence. And so here it is. Peter is beginning to realize he's in the presence of who? Something bigger than himself, God, right? Something different. But yet, he's a human being. Yeah.
He
How does this
doesn't know for
mesh?
sure
He doesn't. How does this mesh? He's, doing something remarkable here, but yet it's, it's a man.
Doesn't make sense.
It's
here.
a man, yeah. It doesn't make sense. So, is God really going to hang out in a smelly fishing boat?
With all those fish swimming
Yeah,
around.
yeah.
Right?
Right.
Is that really where God's going to hang out? Well, the answer is yes.
And lots worse.
That's exactly where he's going to hang out. And a lot worse. Eventually, he'll be up on a cross.
Do you think Jesus knew all this ahead of time? Because he was so quick to tell Simon he will be a fisher of men.
Yeah, I think he does.
And James and John even are,
Yeah.
The
He does.
plan was
Big
already
disciples.
And we already know that from the first time that they met in John chapter 1. When Andrew brings Simon to him, it says Jesus gazed at him in blepo. I think I've told you about that word before. Blepo means to just see something. When
See
you-
through almost.
Yes, and when you add the prefix "em" to it, emblepo, it means to consider or to gaze or to see through. He sees everything. He goes, "You are Simon, but you will be called Peter. You will be called Cephas, Peter." Jesus already knows everything about Simon. He sees him through, and he knows him.
Is that where it ends in on this church and on this rock I will build?
That's in Matthew 16, right? When finally Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" And who speaks up? Simon says, "You're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God." Jesus says, "Yes, and upon this confession, the church will be built."
That's cool.
It is. And it already begins here. Don't be afraid. Now on you will catch men. Kind of like Isaiah. Who will go and speak for us? And Simon is being told here, you're going to be the one who's going to catch people from now on. And he leaves things and he follows Jesus. And I think that it's not until he has that vision, Simon Peter has that vision in Acts chapter 10 of the food coming down from the heavens. Get up, Peter, kill and eat. That Peter finally gets the catching of people means all people, not just Jewish people. He's been sent to catch all people. There are no people who are unclean, who God will not love.
St. Peter's in Wayweed, they have that rock there.
Yes,
That's part of the symbol.
that was part of their
Church.
dedication service when they put whatever they did. They put on that big edition in their narthex.
Yeah.
And that was built on the rock. That whole, I went to the service. It was,
Well, and the thing about Peter is he's a fragile stone, though, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a fragile stone.
But isn't it,
He sinks pretty easily.
the Catholic Church believes that
He's the first
he
pope.
is the,
He's the
yeah.
first pope.
that the church was built on
On,
Peter the Rock.
right.
That's
And we would say his confession,
his
which
confession is.
he makes.
Yes.
But yeah, it's not his
Not
works.
his,
Yeah.
right.
Even Jesus says, you did not come on this on your own, Simon Peter, but this was revealed to you by the Spirit.
When they have the symbolism of the rock, isn't it the church, not just Peter, right? It's Peter
It's
the
the
rock, but it's still the church, right?
Christ would be the
About
rock.
church.
Christ would be the rock,
Oh,
I would think, yeah.
And I think that figure, whatever it is outside of St. Pete's with the rock and the cross on the rock, that's very symbolic.
Right, and so what is Peter's confession is Jesus is the Messiah. He is the Messiah. There's the salvation, yeah, in the Messiah, not in Peter. Right. But Peter considered the first pope, that he would be considered, the popes are considered the vicars of Christ. They're his substitute spokesman on earth. Yes, they are, but not infallible. Right, and that was Luther's problem, was the infallibilities of the Pope. He had no problem following the Pope as long as the Pope agreed with the Scriptures and would not say, "I'm above and beyond what the Scriptures teach," which is what they did. And that was Luther's problem with the papacy, is the papacy claimed an authoritative power even beyond the Scriptures.
They were very political
At that time, yes.
at that time.
Oh,
They
yes,
were
it was, yeah.
running things pretty
The
much.
British were running things with them and the emperor, the empire. Yeah, they went hand in hand. Unless you didn't like the Pope, then one emperor made him captive and replaced him with his own Pope.
Oh.
That was
Didn't know that.
yeah. Back in, I think it was something with France. Yeah,
well, like Venice, it was powerful clans, they would put their own person in there.
Yeah.
Families, clans, families, you know.
yeah. You could buy the office of being a bishop. You could buy it.
Just like you could buy almost anything. I mean, you bought forgiveness.
Right.
You had to get out of purgatory, so
Yeah.
you kept buying.
Yeah, you could buy forgiveness. And that was that way in the day of the prophets. That's what they criticized. Micah, Amos, they were very critical of everybody using their power and their influence and their money to buy what they wanted to buy, and to hear what you would buy a prophet who would speak about peace when everything was falling apart. As long as the prophet said God's on your side, then you could feel God was on your side. It doesn't matter if it was or not. You could buy a prophet who would say that, you'd feel good.
That had to be very discouraging for the poor people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't have anything. And they couldn't even be saved because they didn't have any money.
Representation at all.
How disheartened would you be?
Yeah.
That's why this thing called the American experiment has been pretty revolutionary. And it's worth protecting. The freedoms and the liberties that we have. And the rights that we have.
Yeah.
It's not a normal thing in the history of the world.
No, it isn't.
Alrighty, so we're going to go with holy humanity. We're going to take a look at both Jesus' natures. He's holy, he's totally something else, but he's also fully human, willing to chum around with guys in stinky fishing boats.
The tax collectors.
And tax collectors. That'll be the following week. His message of grace.
Skip ahead, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. He's going to be with the sinners, yeah. That'll be his message of grace. That's what grace is all about, his message. He's going to hang around with the ragamuffins of the world.
Fallen woman.
That's next week. Yeah. Luke chapter 7. With the woman who is obviously sinner. Doesn't he know who she is? Jesus says, she's got a lot of sins, you're right. But they've been forgiven. You who don't think you got any sins? How can I forgive him if you don't think you got any? All right, we'll close off.